At 07:15 on December 7, 1944, Second Lieutenant Leonard Lomell crouched behind a stone cemetery wall in Bergstein, Germany, staring across a snow-covered field at Hill 400, watching German machine gunners adjust their positions in the pillboxes 400 yards away. 24 years old, veteran of Point du Hoc on D-Day, leading what remained of Dog Company, 2nd Ranger Battalion, into an attack that 4 entire divisions had already failed to complete. The Germans had turned Hill 400 into a fortress, observation tower at the summit, concrete bunkers, interlocking fields of fire. From that vantage point, they could see every American movement in the Roar Valley below, every truck, every tank, every soldier crossing open ground. The 9th Infantry Division had tried to take it in September, 4,500 casualties, 3 kilometers gained. The 28th Division attacked in November, 6,000 casualties, no ground gained. The 4th Infantry Division lost another 6,000 men in the first week of December. The 5th Armored Division threw tanks at the hill 3 days ago. German 88mm guns destroyed them before they reached the tree line. Now the Rangers were being asked to do what thousands of regular infantry could not. 120 men from companies Dog and Fox, no tank support, no additional artillery beyond what 1st Army could spare. Just Rangers, their rifles, and a plan that assumed speed would compensate for numbers. Lomell had led a reconnaissance patrol at 0300 that morning, crawled to within 200 yards of the German positions, counted the pillboxes, marked the machine gun nests. The intelligence was clear. The hill was defended by the 980th Grenadier Regiment, part of the 272nd Volksgrenadier Division, veteran troops, well supplied, dug into positions they had spent weeks fortifying. Behind Lomell, Captain Otto Masny moved along the line of Rangers. Big man, 6'3", commanded Fox Company. He checked weapons, adjusted ammunition belts. The Rangers had been trucked forward from their bivouac area the previous night, arrived at Bergstein at 0200, marched 2 miles through freezing rain to reach their assault positions. The plan was simple. Dog Company would assault the right side of the hill, Fox Company the left. Company Easy would remain in Bergstein as reserve. The Rangers would cross 400 yards of open ground, climb the 45-degree slope, take the bunkers at the summit, then hold against whatever the Germans threw at them. Lomell knew the odds. At Point du Hoc, the Rangers had climbed 90-foot cliffs under fire, lost 30% of the assault force in the first hour, held the position for 2 days against counterattacks. Every Ranger in Dog Company remembered that fight. Every Ranger knew this one would be worse. The temperature was 28 degrees, ground frozen solid. Digging foxholes at the top would be nearly impossible. The hill was covered with fir trees. German artillery would airburst the rounds above the trees, turn the forest into a killing field of shrapnel and wood splinters. At 0725, the American artillery barrage began. 18 batteries, 105mm howitzers, 155mm guns, 240mm shells. The bombardment walked up the hill in sections, started at the base, moved toward the summit. The sound was continuous. The ground shook from the impacts. Lomell watched the explosions through the morning twilight, saw trees disintegrating, saw bunkers taking direct hits, knew the barrage would suppress the Germans but not destroy them. Concrete and earth could survive artillery. The Rangers would still face machine guns when they reached the slope. If you want to see how Lomell's Rangers took Hill 400 against impossible odds, please hit that like button. It helps us share more stories like this. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Lomell. At 0728, the artillery shifted, began hitting the summit exclusively. That was the signal. Lomell looked left and right, saw Rangers fixing bayonets, saw men checking grenades one final time. The assault would begin in 2 minutes. 400 yards of frozen field. German machine guns zeroed on every approach. Lomell touched the Thompson submachine gun slung across his chest. 30-round magazine, 2 spares in his belt, 4 fragmentation grenades. He had carried the same loadout at Point du Hoc. At 0730, Captain Masny stood up behind the cemetery wall. The Rangers rose from cover. 120 men moving in 2 waves across snow-covered ground. No battle cry, no shouting, just the sound of boots on frozen earth and the distant thunder of artillery hitting the summit. Lomell moved with the first wave. The plan assumed speed. Cross the field before German machine gunners could recover from the barrage. Reach the tree line. Assault up the slope before the enemy could organize. The first German machine gun opened fire at 150 yards. MG-42. 1,500 rounds per minute. The gunner had survived the artillery. Had stayed at his post in a bunker near the base of the hill. The tracers cut through the dawn light. Rangers dropped. Some hit. Some taking cover. The formation kept moving. Lomell saw Private William Anderson go down 30 yards to his left. Saw Sergeant Ed Secor dive behind a slight rise in the ground. Saw Fox Company taking fire from a second machine gun position on their flank. The crossing that was supposed to take 2 minutes was stretching into 4. Every second gave the Germans time to man their weapons. At 200 yards, German mortars began falling, 81mm rounds, preset coordinates for the field. The first salvo landed short. The second walked closer. Rangers kept moving. The doctrine was clear. Standing still in open ground meant death. Forward movement was survival. Private Kenneth Harsh took shrapnel to the face at 100 yards, kept running, blood streaming down his neck. A replacement soldier froze, curled into a ball. Lomell saw it happen, saw other Rangers moving past the paralyzed man. No time to stop. The assault could not slow. Lieutenant Ken McClure led his platoon toward the left flank, took a bullet through his right leg at 75 yards, went down on one knee, kept directing his men forward, pointed toward gaps in the German fire, would not leave the field until every man in his platoon had passed him. At 50 yards from the tree line, Captain Masney took a round through his shoulder, absorbed the impact, kept moving, blood soaking through his field jacket. He had led Fox Company since training, had survived Sicily, Salerno, and Normandy. The Rangers hit the tree line at 07:33, 3 minutes after leaving the cemetery wall. They had crossed 400 yards under direct fire, lost 14 men killed or wounded in the crossing. The survivors spread into the trees, found cover behind trunks and fallen logs, caught their breath for 30 seconds while German mortars continued to fall behind them. Lomell looked up the slope, 45 degrees, 400 feet of vertical climb, covered with fir trees and German positions. He could see the first line of bunkers 60 yards above, could hear German troops shouting orders. The artillery barrage had shifted to the summit. The middle section of the hill was now undefended by American guns. The slope was too steep for a coordinated advance. Small unit tactics. Fire teams. 3 or 4 men working together. Lomell gathered his platoon, 32 Rangers, pointed up the hill. They had trained for this in Scotland, England, and France. The technique was brutal and simple. Grenades first, bayonets second. At 07:35, Dog Company began climbing. Fox Company moved parallel to their left. The frozen ground made footing treacherous. Rangers grabbed tree trunks for leverage, pulled themselves upward. German machine guns opened fire from the bunkers above. The rounds snapped through the trees. Bark exploded. Wood splinters filled the air. Private Anderson reached the German bunker at 70 yards up the slope. Log construction, firing aperture facing downhill. He could see the machine gun barrel protruding. Anderson pulled 2 fragmentation grenades, yanked the pins, threw both through the aperture, ducked behind a tree. The grenades detonated. The machine gun fell silent. Sergeant Elrod Petty led Fox Company's assault on the left flank, veteran of Pointe du Hoc. His squad moved in bounds, 1 man providing covering fire while 3 advanced. They reached the concrete pillbox at 80 yards, steel door. Petty pulled his Browning automatic rifle, shoved the muzzle through the firing slit, emptied a 20-round magazine into the interior. At 100 yards up the slope, the Rangers encountered wire, triple concertina, stretched between trees, blocking the direct route to the summit. German engineers had placed it where terrain funneled attackers. The wire forced a choice: go around and expose flanks, or cut through and become stationary targets. Lomell chose through. Pulled wire cutters from his pack, started cutting. Sergeant Tom Ruggiero provided covering fire. The wire was thick, military grade. Each strand took 15 seconds to cut. German mortars started falling on their position. 81mm rounds airburst in the trees. Shrapnel rained down. A Ranger behind Lomell screamed, took metal through his back, fell forward against the wire. Lomell kept cutting, got through the first belt, started on the 2nd. His hands were numb from cold. A German grenade landed 5 feet away. Lomell dropped behind a log. The grenade detonated, wood splinters embedded in his field jacket. He stood up, kept cutting. At 07:48, 18 minutes after the assault began, Dog Company broke through the wire, reached the final 100 yards to the summit. They could see the observation tower now, could see German troops moving between positions, and from above, they could hear something that changed everything. Diesel engines, grinding gears. The Germans were moving armor onto Hill 400. The Rangers reached the summit at 08:35, 1 hour and 5 minutes after leaving the cemetery wall. They had climbed through machine gun fire, mortar barrages, and triple belts of concertina wire. Now they stood on top of Hill 400, the highest point in the Ruhr Valley, 1,322 feet above sea level. And the Germans were not gone. The observation tower stood 50 yards ahead, 3-story wooden structure, concrete base. From its top level, German artillery observers could see 15 miles in every direction, could direct fire on every American position in the valley. The tower was the key to the entire German defensive line. Private Anderson was the first Ranger to reach the main bunker at the summit. Steel door, closed. He could hear movement inside, German voices, boots on concrete. Anderson kicked the door. It did not move. He stepped back, pulled a grenade, cooked it for 2 seconds, threw it against the door. The grenade bounced, rolled back toward Anderson. He dove behind a fallen tree. The grenade detonated 15 feet away. Shrapnel tore through his right side. He died before Captain Masney reached his position. Lomell arrived at the bunker 30 seconds later, saw Anderson's body, saw the steel door still closed. German machine gun fire was coming from firing ports on both sides of the structure. Lomell pulled his Thompson, moved along the bunker wall, reached a firing port, shoved the muzzle through, emptied the magazine. 30 rounds in 4 seconds. The machine gun inside fell silent. Captain Masney arrived with 6 Rangers from Fox Company. His shoulder was still bleeding. He ignored it, pointed at the bunker door. 2 Rangers placed satchel charges against the hinges, pulled the fuses, ran back 20 yards. The charges detonated. The door collapsed inward. Rangers rushed through, found 12 German soldiers inside, 8 dead from Lomell's Thompson fire, 4 wounded. The wounded were disarmed and moved outside. By 0840, the Rangers held the summit. They had captured 28 German prisoners, killed approximately 40 more, lost 16 Rangers killed in the assault, another 23 wounded. That left 81 Rangers on top of Hill 400, 81 men to hold 1,300 feet of hilltop against whatever the Germans sent next. Lomell knew the Germans would counterattack. That was doctrine. German commanders did not surrender terrain without attempting to retake it. The question was when, and with what force. The diesel engines they had heard during the climb suggested armor. Probably self-propelled guns. Maybe tanks. That would be a problem. Rangers carried no anti-tank weapons heavier than bazookas, and bazookas were effective only at close range against frontal armor. The ground at the summit was frozen. Lomell tried to dig a foxhole with his entrenching tool, got through 2 inches of topsoil before hitting frozen earth. The tool bounced off. Digging was impossible. The Rangers would have to use existing German positions, bunkers, fighting holes, whatever the defenders had prepared. That meant defending from fixed positions instead of creating new ones. Lieutenant Howard Kettlehut arrived at 0850, forward observer, 56th Armored Field Artillery Battalion. He carried a radio and 2 enlisted men. His job was to coordinate all artillery support for the Rangers on the hill. Kettlehut climbed into the observation tower, set up his radio on the 2nd level, began calling in defensive fire coordinates to every artillery battery in range. At 0900, Lomell conducted a quick reconnaissance of their position. The hilltop was roughly oval, 400 yards long, 200 yards wide, covered with damaged trees and shell craters from the American barrage. The Rangers occupied positions along the forward crest facing south and southeast. That was the direction German counterattacks would come from. The reverse slope offered some protection from direct fire, but was exposed to German artillery positions in the valley. Sergeant Ed Secor gathered ammunition from German positions, found 3 MG-42 machine guns, 15,000 rounds of belted ammunition, 20 stick grenades. The Rangers redistributed the ammunition. Each man took extra magazines, extra grenades. They had learned at Pointe du Hoc that ammunition determined how long you could hold a position. At 09:15, German artillery began falling on Hill 400, 105mm guns. The first salvo landed on the southern slope. The second hit the summit. The rounds airburst in the damaged trees. Shrapnel screamed through the air. A ranger near Lomell took metal through his helmet, dropped without a sound. Lomell dragged him into a bunker. The man was dead. The artillery barrage lasted 10 minutes, continuous, devastating. The Germans were using fire missions that had been pre-registered on the hilltop. They knew every coordinate, every distance, every elevation. The Rangers huddled in whatever cover they could find: bunkers, shell craters, behind fallen trees. The barrage killed 3 more Rangers, wounded 5. At 09:30, the artillery stopped. That was the signal. Lomell looked down the southern slope through the smoke and debris, saw movement in the tree line 300 yards below, saw German infantry forming up, saw officers directing troops into assault formations. He counted approximately 150 men. They were coming up the same route the Rangers had just climbed. The first German counterattack began at 09:35. 150 infantry from the 654th Grenadier Regiment. They moved up the southern slope in 3 waves, 50 men per wave, 20 yards between waves. Standard German assault doctrine. The first wave would draw fire. The second would exploit gaps. The third would consolidate any breakthrough. Lomell had positioned his Rangers along the forward crest. 30 men from Dog Company on the right, 25 from Fox Company on the left. The rest were in reserve positions or manning the captured German bunkers. Every man had clear fields of fire down the slope. Every man knew to hold fire until the Germans reached 100 yards. Lieutenant Kettlehut watched the German assault from the observation tower, called grid coordinates to the 56th Armored Field Artillery Battalion. 3 batteries responded, 18 guns, 105mm howitzers. Kettlehut adjusted fire, walked the barrage down the slope ahead of the advancing Germans. The first salvo landed at 200 yards, the second at 150. The German first wave reached 150 yards, kept climbing. The artillery had not stopped them. Rangers opened fire. 30 M1 Garins, 3 Browning automatic rifles, 2 captured MG-42s. The combined firepower tore through the advancing troops. Germans dropped. Some hit, some seeking cover behind trees. The wave staggered, slowed, kept coming. At 100 yards, Rangers threw grenades. Fragmentation grenades rolled down the slope, detonated among the German troops. The explosions created gaps in the assault line. German officers shouted orders, tried to maintain formation. The second wave was already climbing through the casualties of the first. Sergeant Secor fired his Browning automatic rifle in short bursts. 5 rounds. Shift target. 5 rounds. Conserving ammunition. Hitting center mass. He had learned on D-Day that sustained fire burned through magazines too quickly, that aim shots killed more than spraying bullets. His BAR accounted for 7 Germans in the first 2 minutes of the fight. The German second wave reached 75 yards, split into 2 groups, tried to flank the Ranger positions on both sides. Lomell saw the maneuver, shifted 5 Rangers to cover the right flank. Secor moved 3 men to the left. The flanking attempts ran into concentrated fire. Germans went down. The survivors retreated back down the slope. At 09:42, 7 minutes after the counterattack began, the German assault broke. The remaining troops withdrew down the hill, left their dead and wounded on the slope, disappeared into the tree line below. The Rangers had held, but the cost was visible. 4 more Rangers dead, 7 wounded. That left 70 Rangers combat effective on the hilltop. 70 men against whatever came next. Lomell knew this was only the first attempt. German doctrine called for repeated counterattacks, each one stronger than the last, each one better coordinated. The first attack had been hasty, poorly supported. The next would be different. The Germans would bring more artillery, more troops, possibly armor. At 09:50, Lomell conducted another ammunition count. Each Ranger had an average of 40 rounds remaining for their M1. The BAR gunners had 2 magazines each. The captured German machine guns had approximately 3,000 rounds total. Grenades were running low. Each man had one or two left. The ammunition situation was becoming critical. Captain Masney gathered the Rangers at 1000. His shoulder wound had stopped bleeding, but his left arm was useless. He used his right hand to point down the slope. Explained what the Rangers already knew. The Germans would come again, probably within the hour. This time in greater numbers. This time with better support. The Rangers needed to prepare defensive positions, redistribute ammunition, identify fallback points if the Germans broke through. Major George Williams arrived at the summit at 10:15, battalion executive officer. He had been with the reserve companies in Bergstein, heard the fighting, climbed the hill to assess the situation, saw the Ranger casualties, saw the ammunition situation, saw 70 exhausted men holding a hilltop against an entire German regiment. Williams made a decision. He would request reinforcements from the 8th Infantry Division. But reinforcements would take hours. The Rangers would have to hold until then. At 10:30, German artillery began falling again, heavier than before. 155mm guns. The rounds impacted across the entire summit. The Germans were saturating the hilltop, trying to kill Rangers before the next infantry assault. The barrage lasted 20 minutes, killed 2 more Rangers, wounded 4. The survivors pressed themselves into whatever cover existed, waited for the shells to stop falling. At 10:50, the artillery ceased. Lomell looked down the slope through the smoke, saw movement again, but this time it was different. More troops, better organized, and behind the infantry, he could see what the Rangers had feared: German armor, 3 self-propelled guns, probably Stug assault guns, 75mm main weapons, thick frontal armor, moving slowly up the southern approach. The second counterattack was coming, and the Rangers had no way to stop those guns. The second German counterattack began at 1100 hours. 200 infantry, 3 Stug assault guns. The assault guns stopped at 300 yards, positioned themselves to provide direct fire support for the infantry. Their 75mm guns could destroy any Ranger position with a single round. And the Rangers had only 2 bazookas. Sergeant James White commanded 1 bazooka team, 6 rounds total. He positioned himself behind a damaged bunker on the right flank, waited for the Stugs to close the distance. Bazooka effective range against armor was 150 yards maximum. Against frontal armor, closer was better. White needed the assault guns to climb within 100 yards before he could engage with any chance of penetration. The German infantry advanced in 4 waves this time, 50 men per wave, better spacing than the first attack. They moved through the trees using cover. Officers controlled the advance with whistle signals. The assault was methodical, professional, the kind of attack that veteran troops executed after learning from initial failures. Lieutenant Kettlehut called for artillery at 250 yards. 8 batteries responded this time. First Army had recognized the importance of Hill 400. Every available gun in range was being directed to support the Rangers. The artillery barrage landed ahead of the German advance. 105mm shells, 155mm shells. The explosions tore through the trees, created a wall of fire and shrapnel between the Rangers and the attackers. But the Germans kept coming, walked through the barrage, took casualties, closed the distance. At 200 yards they went to ground, began returning fire. German machine guns opened up from positions in the tree line. Mortar rounds started falling on the summit. The Germans had learned. They were suppressing Ranger positions before advancing further. The 3 Stug assault guns moved forward, reached 200 yards, began firing high explosive rounds at Ranger bunkers. The first round hit the observation tower, blew out the second level. Kettlehut and his radio operator were thrown against the wall. Both survived. The radio was destroyed. Kettlehut climbed down from the tower, found another radio from a dead Ranger, began calling coordinates again. Sergeant White watched the lead Stug advance to 150 yards. He aimed his bazooka at the front glacis plate. Knew the odds. Bazooka could penetrate 60mm of armor at that range. Stug frontal armor was 80mm. The round would probably bounce, but White had no choice. He fired. The rocket streaked downhill, hit the Stug upper glacis, detonated. The armor held. The Stug stopped, traversed its gun toward White's position. Fired. The 75mm round hit the bunker wall 2 feet from White. The concussion knocked him unconscious. The second bazooka team engaged the trailing Stug at 120 yards, hit the side armor, Penetrated. The assault gun brewed up. Flames erupted from the engine compartment. The crew bailed out. Rangers shot them as they ran. The burning Stug blocked the trail. The other two assault guns could not advance past it. They reversed, moved back down the slope. The German infantry lost their armored support. At 11:15, the German infantry waves were at 100 yards. Rangers opened fire. Every weapon on the hilltop, M1 rifles, Browning automatic rifles, captured MG-42s, Thompson submachine guns. The volume of fire was devastating. Germans dropped by the dozen, but they kept coming. The second wave reached 75 yards. The third wave was climbing through the dead of the first. Lomell saw German troops reaching the wire that the Rangers had cut during the assault, saw them spreading out along the same defensive line the Germans had used that morning, saw officers organizing for a final rush. The Germans had crossed 200 yards under artillery and rifle fire. They were not stopping. They were coming all the way. At 11:20, the German fourth wave reached 50 yards, fixed bayonets, prepared for the final assault. Lomell looked left and right, saw Rangers running low on ammunition, saw wounded men still firing from their positions, saw Sergeant Secor with blood running down his face from a shrapnel wound. The Rangers had held against two major counterattacks, but they were being ground down, man by man, position by position. Captain Masney was down, taken a second wound to the leg, still directing Fox Company from a shell crater. Major Williams was organizing the reserve Rangers, preparing for hand-to-hand fighting if the Germans broke through. Every Ranger on the hilltop understood what was happening. They were outnumbered, low on ammunition, exhausted, and the Germans were about to charge. At 11:22, German officers blew their whistles. The fourth wave rose from cover. 100 German infantry charged the Ranger positions with fixed bayonets, and behind them, down the slope, Lomell could see more troops forming up. A fifth wave, a sixth. The Germans were committing everything they had to retaking Hill 400. The German fourth wave hit the Ranger line at 11:23. 100 infantry with fixed bayonets. They came up the last 50 yards screaming. Rangers met them with rifle fire at point-blank range. 10 yards, 5 yards. Then it became hand-to-hand. Bayonets, rifle butts, entrenching tools. The kind of fighting that happened when ammunition ran out and men refused to retreat. Sergeant Ed Secor was firing his Browning automatic rifle when a German round hit the weapon, bent the barrel, made it useless. Secor dropped the bar, looked around his position, saw two dead German soldiers 5 feet away. Both carried MP-40 submachine guns. Secor grabbed both weapons, 32-round magazines, both full. He stood up from his foxhole, started walking toward the advancing Germans, firing both MP-40s from the hip. The Germans saw Secor coming. One man, two enemy weapons, walking through their assault line, firing continuously. Some stopped. Some tried to shoot him. Secor kept walking, kept firing, emptied both magazines, dropped both weapons, picked up a German rifle from a dead soldier, kept fighting. The Rangers behind him saw what he was doing, rose from their positions, followed Secor forward. The German fourth wave broke, fell back under the unexpected counterattack, retreated down the slope, left 30 dead on the hilltop. The survivors ran. The Ranger counterattack pursued them 50 yards, then stopped. The Rangers were too few, too exhausted, too low on ammunition to chase the Germans all the way down the hill. At 11:30, the second German counterattack was over. 200 German infantry had assaulted Hill 400. 140 were dead or wounded on the slopes. The survivors had withdrawn to the tree line below. The Rangers had held again, but the cost was devastating. 12 more Rangers dead, 15 wounded. That left 43 Rangers combat effective, 43 men holding 1,300 feet of hilltop. Lomell conducted another ammunition count at 11:40, average of 20 rounds per man. The BAR gunners were down to their last magazines. The captured German machine guns had 1,000 rounds remaining. Grenades were gone. Most Rangers were down to their last 2 magazines. If the Germans attacked again with the same strength, the Rangers would run out of ammunition before the assault was repulsed. Major Williams gathered the remaining Rangers at 11:45, explained the situation. Reinforcements were being organized. The 8th Infantry Division was sending a company up the hill, but they would not arrive until late afternoon. The Rangers needed to hold for another 5 hours minimum. 5 hours against an enemy that had already demonstrated willingness to accept massive casualties to retake the hill. Captain Walter Block arrived at the summit at noon, battalion surgeon. He had climbed from Bergstein with 2 medics, brought medical supplies, morphine, bandages, sulfa powder. Block set up an aid station in one of the captured German bunkers, began treating wounded Rangers. 23 men with various wounds, shrapnel, bullets, burns from explosions. Block worked methodically, stabilized the critical cases, prepared the wounded for evacuation once reinforcements arrived. At 12:15, German artillery began falling again, the heaviest barrage yet. 155mm guns, 240mm guns. The Germans were using everything in range. The barrage lasted 30 minutes, saturated the entire hilltop. Trees that had survived the morning were cut down. Shell craters overlapped shell craters. The summit of Hill 400 became a moonscape of torn earth and shattered wood. Captain Block's aid station took a direct hit at 12:20. 155mm round penetrated the bunker roof, detonated inside. Block was killed instantly. Both medics were wounded. The medical supplies were destroyed. The wounded Rangers inside were buried under collapsed concrete and timber. It took 20 minutes to dig them out. 3 more Rangers died from their wounds during the extraction. At 12:45, the artillery stopped. Lomell looked down the slope, expected to see another German assault forming. Saw nothing. The tree line was empty. No movement. No troops massing for attack. Just smoke and damaged forest. The silence was worse than the shelling. It meant the Germans were preparing something different. Lieutenant Kettlehut received a radio message at 1300 hours. German reinforcements were moving toward Hill 400. The 6th Parachute Regiment, Fallschirmjägers, elite troops, veterans of Crete and Normandy, a full battalion, 600 men. They were forming up in the valley 3 miles south, expected to reach Hill 400 by mid-afternoon. Field Marshal Walter Model had personally authorized their deployment, had offered Iron Crosses and 2 weeks' leave to any soldier who participated in retaking the hill. Lomell gathered the remaining Rangers, 43 men, most wounded, all exhausted, ammunition nearly gone. He explained what was coming. 600 elite paratroopers, the best infantry the Germans had, against 43 Rangers who had been fighting for 6 hours straight. The math was brutal. The Rangers could hold against company strength attacks, maybe even battalion strength if they had ammunition. But 600 fresh Fallschirmjägers against 43 depleted Rangers was not a fight. It was mathematics. Major Williams asked the question every Ranger was thinking. Could they hold until reinforcements arrived? Lomell looked at the ammunition situation, looked at the casualty count, looked at the men around him. He gave the only answer that made sense. They would find out. The 3rd German counterattack began at 1500 hours. 600 Fallschirmjägers from the 6th Parachute Regiment. They advanced in 6 waves, 100 men per wave, 50 yards between waves. The assault was coordinated with artillery, mortars, machine gun fire from supporting positions in the valley. This was not a hasty attack. This was a deliberate operation by elite troops who knew how to take fortified positions. Lomell watched them come up the southern slope, green and tan camouflage smocks, the distinctive helmets of German paratroopers. They moved with discipline, used cover, advanced by bounds. One squad moving while another provided covering fire. These were not the Volksgrenadiers who had attacked that morning. These were professionals. The Rangers had prepared what defenses they could. 43 men spread across 400 yards of hilltop, every man in a fighting position, every position with clear fields of fire. Lomell had placed the remaining BAR gunners at key points. The captured German machine guns were positioned to create interlocking fire. Every Ranger had been told the same thing. Fire only at targets inside 100 yards. Make every round count. Conserve ammunition until the last possible moment. Lieutenant Kettlehut called for artillery at 500 yards. Every battery in 1st Army range responded. The barrage was massive, continuous. The shells walked down the slope ahead of the advancing Fallschirmjägers. But the paratroopers knew how to move through artillery. They went to ground during the heaviest concentrations, advanced during the gaps, used the terrain, took casualties, but kept coming. At 300 yards, the German artillery began counter-battery fire, targeted the American gun positions in the valley, tried to silence the support that was keeping the Rangers alive. The American artillery fire slackened. Some batteries went silent. Others continued firing, but with reduced accuracy. The Germans were systematically eliminating the Ranger support. The first Fallschirmjäger wave reached 200 yards at 15:15. Rangers opened fire. Every weapon. The Germans went to ground. Returned fire. Their volume of fire was overwhelming. Machine guns, rifles, mortars. The Rangers were taking casualties from the sheer weight of German firepower. 2 Rangers died in the first minute. 3 more were wounded. The second wave moved through the first at 150 yards. The Germans were leapfrogging. Standard assault doctrine. Keep the defenders suppressed with continuous fire while advancing elements closed the distance. The tactic was working. Rangers could not raise their heads to aim without taking fire. Sergeant Secor was hit again at 15:20. Shrapnel through his left shoulder. He ignored it. Kept firing his rifle. Had already gone through 2 dead Rangers' ammunition. Was down to his last 8 rounds. Around him, other Rangers were in the same situation, calling out for ammunition, sharing magazines, taking rounds from the dead. At 15:25, the German third wave reached 100 yards. Rangers threw their last grenades. The explosions created gaps in the assault line. But the fourth wave was already moving through the casualties. The Germans had numbers. They could absorb losses that would break a smaller force. They kept coming. Lomell saw German paratroopers reaching the wire at 75 yards, saw them cutting through, saw officers directing troops to flank positions. The Germans were not charging blindly up the hill. They were maneuvering, looking for weak points in the Ranger line, and they were finding them. The Rangers simply did not have enough men to cover 400 yards of hilltop against 600 attackers. At 15:30, a German squad broke through on the left flank. 10 Fallschirmjägers. They had found a gap between Ranger positions, were moving along the reverse slope. Coming up behind the Ranger line, Lomell saw them, grabbed 5 Rangers, led them to intercept. The 2 groups met in a shell crater, point-blank range. Lomell emptied his Thompson, killed 3 Germans. The other Rangers killed 4 more. The remaining 3 Germans retreated, but the breakthrough attempt showed how thin the Ranger defense had become. Major Williams was coordinating the defense from the observation tower, was directing the few remaining Rangers to threatened positions, was trying to create a coherent defensive line from 43 exhausted men. At 15:35, he received a radio message. The reinforcements from the 8th Infantry Division were delayed. German artillery had hit the column on the approach road. The company would not reach Hill 400 until evening, possibly not until after dark. Williams looked at the situation. 43 Rangers, most wounded, almost no ammunition, facing 600 elite paratroopers, with no reinforcements coming for hours. He made a decision. The Rangers would hold their current positions as long as possible. When ammunition ran out, they would fight with bayonets. When that failed, they would use entrenching tools. The Rangers would not retreat. They would hold or die on Hill 400. At 15:40, the German 5th wave reached 50 yards, fixed bayonets, prepared for the final assault. The 6th wave was moving up behind them. Lomell looked at his Thompson. 1 magazine left, 15 rounds. He looked at the Rangers around him, saw men down to their last few rounds, saw wounded men still in fighting positions, saw exhaustion, saw determination. The Germans were about to charge, and this time, the Rangers might not have enough ammunition to stop them. At 15:45 on December 7th, 1944, the German 5th and 6th waves charged the Ranger positions. 500 Fallschirmjägers with fixed bayonets. They came up the last 50 yards, firing from the hip. Rangers met them with their remaining ammunition, fired until magazines ran empty, then fixed their own bayonets. Lieutenant Kettlehut called for danger close artillery, gave coordinates that put the barrage within 50 yards of Ranger positions. The artillery batteries complied. Shells began landing among the charging Germans. The explosions tore through both sides. Germans died. Rangers died. But the barrage broke the German assault. The Fallschirmjägers could not advance through the wall of steel and explosives. They went to ground at 30 yards, returned fire, did not retreat, but could not advance. For 2 hours, the battle became a stalemate. Germans at 30 yards, Rangers at 0. Both sides firing when targets appeared. Both sides taking casualties. The Germans tried to flank. Rangers shifted to block. The Germans brought up more ammunition. Rangers collected rounds from the dead. Neither side could gain advantage. Neither side would retreat. At 17:30, As darkness began falling, the sound every Ranger had been waiting for arrived. American artillery increased. Not German counter-battery fire, not harassment fire. Concentrated barrages on the southern slope, hitting German assembly areas, hitting German support positions. First Army was throwing everything available at the approaches to Hill 400. At 1800 hours, fresh American troops appeared on the northern slope. Company from the 8th Infantry Division, 200 men, full ammunition. They moved onto the hilltop, took positions alongside the Rangers. The Germans saw the reinforcements, saw their numerical advantage disappearing. At 1815, the Fallschirmjägers withdrew, pulled back down the southern slope, disappeared into the darkness and damaged forest. The battle for Hill 400 was over. The Rangers had held for 10.5 hours, had repulsed 3 major counterattacks, had fought off 600 elite German paratroopers with 43 men, had held the most important terrain in the Ruhr Valley against everything the Germans could throw at them. The cost was visible across the hilltop. 23 Rangers killed in action, 86 wounded, 4 missing. Of the 120 Rangers who had assaulted the hill that morning, only 11 remained combat effective by nightfall. The German casualties were catastrophic. 412 dead on the slopes. Unknown wounded evacuated during the fighting. 3 destroyed assault guns. The 6th Parachute Regiment had been effectively destroyed as a fighting force. Lieutenant Leonard Lomell was evacuated on December 8th with a concussion and shrapnel wounds to his arm. Before leaving, he walked the hilltop one final time, saw where Captain Block had died, saw where Private Anderson had fallen, saw the positions where Rangers had held against impossible odds. Years later, when asked about D-Day, Lomell always gave the same answer. June 6th was not his longest day. December 7th, 1944, was his longest and most miserable day during 75 years of life. The Rangers were relieved by the 13th Infantry Regiment on December 9th, moved back to a bivouac area in the Hurtgen Forest, were immediately placed on alert for the next crisis. 9 days later, the Germans launched the Battle of the Bulge. The Rangers were sent to defend the northern shoulder, were not given time to rest, were not given full replacements. The 70 Rangers who survived Hill 400 would fight through the Ardennes, through the Rhineland, into Germany itself. The Germans retook Hill 400 in late December during the opening days of the Bulge. The 13th Regiment, depleted from continuous combat, could not hold against the German counteroffensive. American forces would not recapture the hill until February 1945, but by then, the strategic situation had changed. The Bulge had failed. The Germans were in retreat. Hill 400 no longer mattered. What mattered was what the Rangers had proven, that small units with superior training could accomplish what divisions could not, that determination and tactical skill could overcome numerical disadvantage, that Americans could match German elite forces and win. Military historians would later call the defense of Hill 400 a textbook example of small unit leadership under fire. The hill was saved, they wrote, by brains and bravery at the junior level. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about Rangers who held hills with courage and determination. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching. And thank you for making sure Lieutenant Lomell and his Rangers don't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.